I'll tell you where I failed, straight up. I held on too long. I had an opportunity
Mm-hmm.
probably 3 years before the company officially shut down to sell it for
Mm.
millions of dollars. And at that
Yep.
time, I knew I should have. I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, this is my baby. I brought this here from
Yes.
nothing. And it wasn't just me, but I was stubborn thinking, look, this will pass. I can revive this. I just need
Mm-hmm.
to hold on. And as I'm holding on, the bank account's depleting.
Yeah.
So that was my downfall. I waited too long and I ended up selling parts of it for pennies on the dollar.
Welcome, badass entrepreneurs. It's time to hear the world's movers, shakers, and difference makers spill their secrets for unlimited success. So strap in, for Badass Entrepreneurs Only begins now.
Hi, I'm Coach Dan Gordon, and welcome to a very different version of For Badass Entrepreneurs Only. Today, I am interviewing Greg Kalikas, and usually I do a tremendous amount of research and backlog and have a lot of questions, and I'm not doing that. So let's get badass with Greg Kalikas. Greg, welcome to For Badass Entrepreneurs Only.
Thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure, man. I've been looking forward to it and I can't wait to get started.
We've started, so here we go. The reason that I wanted you on the show is because, you're in digital marketing now, but there was a huge pivot. Like you were doing some very different things. So let's start with where you were previous to the digital marketing space. What were you doing?
Yeah, so I actually was the CEO of my own company called the NWA FS. And essentially, it was an event promotion company based here in the Midwest and Northeast Ohio. But, I had initially launched it back in 2004.
What kind of events were you putting on?
Mostly mixed martial arts. It was all combat sports, kickboxing events, but mostly MMA. And we actually were one of the feeder leagues to the UFC. And,
What does that mean?
That means we were one of the options that the UFC would look at to help develop and identify.
So you were like the farm league to.
Exactly. But we were like the minor leagues to the Guardians, or I would say Division I college football to the NFL.
Gotcha. Okay. And how did you get into promoting combat sports?
See, this is where it gets crazy. Is a little backstory. I'm a lifelong martial artist. My, family owned a martial arts studio in Ohio. I remember my dad taking me to Taekwondo classes. So grew up with martial arts. I ended up going to the University of Akron, and ultimately I wanted to major in sports marketing. Didn't happen. A buddy of mine talked me into dropping out of college, and we were going to open our own sporting goods store. We never even got close to realizing that. My whole life, I had an entrepreneurial mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So around that time, I had my own small drywall business that I was starting to grow. Of course, I was playing rec league softball like many of us do at that age. And a freak accident, I ended up breaking my leg in 3 places and ended up having to get 2 surgeries. And if you look at an X-ray of my left leg, you would think it was robotic, right? There's rods and pins, but it ended up being one of the, you said, pivotal moments of my life, because for 6 months I was off my feet. And back then, internet was the thing. Podcasting wasn't really podcasting, but I was listening to a local Cleveland sports talk show, and I just had this idea for a local sports show. And I reached out to host of one of the radio stations, gave him my idea, never thinking I'd hear back from them. But about a week later, he emails me back and says, "Hey, we really like the idea. I want you to come here and I want to introduce you to our general manager."
Okay. And you're off your feet, you're in bed, and you think, yeah, I'd like to do a radio show.
Wasn't even that I'd like to do it. It was something that I really wanted to hear. I was a diehard sports fan. And so I just had this concept, emailed it up to him. The guy emailed me back and, he actually liked it. It was about trade rumors at that time.
But this is important because most people come up with ideas and don't do them because they think, well, like, who's good? What was your background in broadcast at the time?
0.
Okay, great. Right. So you had zero credibility. You haven't been to broadcast school. You've never sat behind a microphone and done an interview. And you sent an email to someone, say, hey, know what? You should put me on the radio. That's a good idea.
It wasn't even that. It was like, hey, here's an idea for a show that I think a lot of people that listen to the station would love.
Ah,
And again, it was just a selfish thing that, hey, man, I would love to hear something like this. And I'm bored. So I emailed it. Obviously they thought there was something to it. So they decided to invite me. Yeah. Again, out of the blue. But looking back, there was a reason for it. And at that time, they were partnering with a gentleman named Paul who was launching a streaming website. It was all streaming radio. And they were looking for different content. So as we were talking and they realized that I had a martial arts background, he had asked me, he was like, did you ever think about maybe doing a combat sports or a martial arts related streaming radio show? It's just going to be on the internet. And I'm like, I have
ah.
no idea. I've never done it. I go to these tournaments, but it sounds like fun. What the hell? I'll give it a try. So yeah, they brought me up. My brother and I, started doing it.
When they ask you, was there a part of you that was like, man, I don't know about this. I could come off as just terrible.
I was very nervous. But again, at that time, I was like, what the hell? I have side business that I'm trying to build. I was looking at it as here's a cool opportunity for me to come to a radio station, maybe meet some athletes or,
So you start on this internet talk show.
yes.
What was the reaction?
Well, initially, honestly, they were just trying to fill space. I mean,
Right.
they had their normal, daily post, and they were just trying to fill weekend time. So they put us, I think we were on 10 o'clock on Sunday nights, Eastern time. And again, they just wanted us to talk about martial arts and tournaments. And I was going in blind. They assigned us a board op who had some experience. So he guided us as far as, hey, this is when we take breaks. This is what a bumper is. But I had no idea what the hell I was doing. Neither did my brother. But again, at that time, there was a little niche sport called MMA that was starting to emerge, more so overseas in Asia. But the UFC was starting to get a grassroots following here in the US. So I started talking about it once in a while. I was watching it back then. I think I was the only one that I knew that was watching it, but I knew other people were. There was the VHSs and Blockbuster and all that stuff. And as we start to talk about it, we're starting to get more and more hardcore MMA fans listening to the show. So within 6 months, we actually built up a pretty loyal following. And we were one of two, I guess you can call us media entities that was giving the UFC any type of coverage at all. So Dana White started paying attention and he started to come on the show. And then he started giving me direct access to all of their headlining fighters. So they were coming on doing interviews and promoting their events because there was nobody else doing it.
I want to keep anybody listening out of the thinking of Greg got really lucky, because we make our own luck.
Yes.
Right? You were sitting there, you had nothing to do. You were like, it'd be great to listen to this thing on the radio. And so that was the inciting incident. Like that was the thing. And then you got an offer. And instead of going, well, I'm not good at this, why don't you hire someone else? You're like, sure, I'll do it. Right? So this is the value of saying yes. You constantly say yes. And yes will always get you into trouble. I'm sure there's a part of this story where yes didn't work out. And we'll get there. But the life lessons, the experience, the steps moving forward, and just the things that you get to experience in life happen by saying yes. Okay.
Yes.
So let's jump forward a little bit. Like you're getting some traction. How do you make the jump from on internet radio to starting this promotional company?
So one of my regular guests, a gentleman by the name of Duke Rufus, he was an established UFC MMA coach, and he was starting to promote events in Wisconsin. And at that time, MMA wasn't sanctioned anywhere legally. You could only do it in certain pockets, right? But he was coming on the show and he was like off the air. He said, have you ever thought about promoting a show in Cleveland? I was like, again, I know nothing about promoting events, MMA events. I have no clue on how to do that. But his thing was, look, you've got to build an audience there. And why don't we partner on a show? I'll come and walk you through the process and help you with all the moving pieces. You just really need to get the word out. So again, I was like, what the hell? I just think at that point in time, I knew that combat sports, that the UFC was going to be huge. I could just feel it. I could sense it. There was that upswell, and a part of me, once I got my foot in that door, just didn't want to miss out on a potential opportunity. You can call it selfishness. You can call it I guess in some sense, force, whatever you want to call it. But I knew there was something there.
And I love that. Like, I love it was selfish. I'm going to do something selfish, right? Because that is a driving force. So never be afraid of doing something just for your own selfish purposes, because chances are it's going to work out in a way that helps other people. So let's talk about that. What did you start doing?
So I took a shot. We did our first event. It sold out, I think, 4 weeks, a month before the actual event date. One event turned into 2 events. 2 events turned into 5. But I think within probably 18 months, I had given up a small construction business I had. I got the blessing of my wife. And
you had a construction business.
Yes.
It was doing pretty well.
I was paying the bills.
Right. Were you passionate about construction?
Not at all.
Okay. So this is a great indicator that it was time to move away from it. Now, your wife could have said, hey, look, Greg, you're doing okay in this thing. Do you really want to give up your construction business to, and you could have said, yeah, I guess she's right. I should stick with something that's safe.
It was scary. And on top of that, she was pregnant at that time.
Okay.
But to her credit, and I knew that she was going to support me, and she knows the type of drive that I have. I had to make a decision. Am I going to put everything I have towards this and give it a legitimate shot, or am I not going to do it and probably regret it for the rest of my life? So I did it. I gave up the construction business, launched the NWA FS, full go, hired a team. We ended up getting a local television contract not too far down the road after that. And of course, that was a game changer.
Okay, so your wife was incredibly supportive.
Yes, you have to be.
And so there's 2 elements of that. One is you pick the right woman, clearly. And this is key to the success of an entrepreneur, because our tribe is our vibe, right? And we are enthusiastic about what we do and live in our passion, then we're going to attract other people with that same level of enthusiasm. So when I hear people say, I would have done this, but nobody around me was supportive, I got to call bullshit.
Wow.
Because you didn't either lead them or train them. I see that a lot.
Yeah, right. And, there's what I call the 3 silent killers of success, right? Sleep, stress, and productivity. Now, badass entrepreneurs never get enough sleep. We all have way too much stress, and that puts our productivity in the crapper. I found something that beats the silent killers. It's a technology that lives on your phone. Now, I know this sounds crazy, but it's sound waves that put your brain into states of relaxation and focus. Now, when I first heard about this, I just thought it was bullshit, right? But then I heard that this company, they're called Nucalm, Nucalm. Nucalm is being used by the Army, by U.S. Special Forces, the FBI, professional football teams, pilots, surgeons are using Nucalm instead of anesthesia. And what's his name? Tony Robbins just jumped on board with Nucalm, right? So I thought, at the very least, I got to try this. So I downloaded the app, I put it on my phone, and it just sounds like music. But oh my God, after one session, I was on fire. 20 minutes of Nucalm was like 2 cups of coffee. And then on the other side, I use Nucalm at night, and it puts me out like a light. I wake up in the morning, shot out of a cannon. Now, if you want a free week of Nucalm, it's super simple. Just text the word CALM, CALM, to this number, 213-409-8366. 213-409-8366, and text the word CALM, CALM. Get more sleep, feel less stress, and blow your productivity out of the water. Just text CALM, CALM, to this number, 213-409-8366, and get a free week of Nucalm. Free. Okay, so sorry for going off like this. I'm just super fired up about it. Let's get back into this.
So let's talk about what you did. You took this shot. What happened next?
Took a shot, and wouldn't you know it, the damn thing grew. It really grew, and it grew quickly. Again, I think a lot of it had to do with timing, right? The UFC started to become a thing. They got national TV deals. The sport became sanctioned. We were actually one of the first promotions to do a sanctioned event through the State Athletic Commission here in Ohio. But like I said, that once we got on TV and it was Sports Time Ohio, now it's Bally Sports,
Mm,
that changed the game for us because then we
sure.
had television revenue, we had sponsorships, the marketing was, you couldn't pay for that type of marketing. Within 10 years, we became a multi-million dollar company. We were doing shows all over the US, even internationally.
So things started to really take off. And I want to just talk about this kind of a character arc as if you're a character in a movie, because here you are, broken bones, lying in bed, going, man, I would really like to hear some badass MMA radio. And you went from being somebody interested in hearing about it to now you're an expert in the field,
Yep.
right? People are coming to you for expert advice. They're asking your opinions. They want to know what to do. And I'm wondering if there was any level of imposter syndrome. If at any point you were like, oh man, I can't believe these people are asking me this question. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I better act like I know what I'm doing. Was there any of that, Greg?
I never really thought about that. I'm a confident guy, so
Yeah.
I always felt I belong here. I know what I'm doing.
Mm.
I've earned where we are. So, maybe not so much the imposter
Okay.
syndrome.
That's good. But let's get into the tipping point where things start to shift. What happened?
I think there was two things. First, the industry started to shift in a sense where not necessarily the bubble burst, but the sport became oversaturated. And I saw it coming, especially from a local level. I think a lot of people saw the success we were having. The state athletic commission got a little greedy. So they were handing out promoters licenses like library cards. So on any given weekend, there might be 6 MMA events going on within a 2-mile radius. But
Yep.
also nationally, the sport's popularity was starting to decline. But I think more so what kind of started me down that path was I got a little too greedy, in a sense where I bit off more than I could chew. And part of that was because I started to see what was happening with the sport. And I was like, I better start to get into a different lane and just in case, so I have something else to fall back on. So
Yeah.
what started to happen was as a lot of these fighters were coming up through my organization and becoming really good
Yeah.
and signing with the UFC, they didn't have representation like other athletes in the major sports, but the money was starting to come. So we launched a small management company where now as the UFC was signing our fighters, we were representing them as their agent, so to speak. So I started a separate management company. And in that sense, our roster grew pretty quickly. And as the head of that company, I was the one that typically had to go on the road, negotiate with the UFC or to be present when they're doing appearances, webinars.
Right.
So
How did you make that growth spurt into this management company? And what did you do next?
I guess any management company is as good as their best talent, right? And I was in a situation where at that time, Stipe Miocic, who happens to be the most decorated heavyweight UFC champion of all time, had come up through my promotion. I was his event promoter, but I wasn't his manager. And at that time, I remember I was in a locker room. We were talking about a teammate of his had a fight coming up, and he was on the phone with his then manager, and he's screaming at this guy, and he hangs up. And I never forget this. He looks at me. You're my fucking manager now. And I just said, okay,
Yeah.
who am I to say no? Right. So,
Right. And this is really key, Greg, because when somebody says, hey, I'd like you to do this thing, they may see something in you that you don't even see in yourself. I witness this all the time. A client will say to me, God, this one person wanted me to do X. I don't do that. So I said, no. I'm like, are you out of your mind? Like, of course you do it. They see it in you. You just don't see it in yourself.
that is
Terrific.
so spot on. So spot on.
Yeah.
And I come to find out a few years later, that's exactly what happened. I had eventually asked him, well, why the hell did you pick me? And again, we had a relationship where as his promoter, I got to work with him. I brought him up from an amateur and nobody knew who he was. And you know, I started pitching him to the UFC before he even turned pro and planting those seeds. He got to see how I do business and he got to trust me. And he knew I was driven and I wasn't going to stop until I got him to the top of that mountain. And ultimately 5 years later, we did. We got there. And that was the sign I needed, in addition to a few other ones, to say, all right, it's time for me to move on to the next chapter, which is ultimately how I got into what I'm doing now.
Like you said, they were passing out these licenses like library cards.
Yeah.
Reminds me in the late 90s when the stand-up comedy revolution happened and suddenly everybody was a stand-up comic. The stand-up comedy industry just crashed because people were terrible at it and nobody wanted to see it anymore. And this is the same thing. Like MMA took over and it got oversaturated and people are like, I'm just tired of watching people kick each other.
Yeah. And I'll tell you where I failed straight up. I held on too long. I had an opportunity probably 3 years before the company officially shut down to sell it for millions of dollars. And at that time, I knew I should have. I'm looking at it. I'm like, man, this is my baby. I brought this here for nothing. And it wasn't just me, but I was stubborn thinking, look, this will pass. I can revive this. I just need to hold on. And as I'm holding on, the bank account's depleting.
Yeah.
So that was my downfall. I waited too long and I ended up selling parts of it for pennies on the dollar. I think people saw the success that we were having.
Yeah.
And I heard others say, if he can do it, why can't we do it? We can probably do it better. And again, it went from the cool thing to go to once every few months and you get all dressed up and you take the limo. Now they're everywhere. They're in these little bars and the state of the sport changed. And it wasn't just local. Like I said, once the UFC sold to IMG, it changed the industry. And I don't think it was for the good. But I knew that. I saw that coming.
Yeah.
I saw the growth of the UFC coming and did something about it, but I didn't.
Okay. This is a great life lesson, right? Because it's just how it works. Everybody listening to this is, if you follow Greg's path, you will follow all of his path. It just won't be your meteoric rise. You won't have a sense, you won't say, okay, it's time to sell, and you'll sell because Greg, you got emotionally attached to what they're doing. Now, you didn't get emotionally attached to construction because you didn't give a shit about it. But this was something that you created. And you're a perfect example of that. You didn't do anything wrong. You followed a path that you had to follow because you had to learn by experience. Because even if you had sold it, you wouldn't be sitting here today saying that was a great idea. You'd be sitting here today saying, I bet if I'd stayed with it, I could have really turned it into something huge. So you essentially lose the whole ball of wax. What's that like for you?
Honestly, at the time, it was relieving.
Why?
Because especially those last few years, and you can probably relate to this, it takes its toll on you, not just financially, but I was on the road probably 3 weeks out of the month for years on end.
And you have a wife and now a little baby.
A kid, yeah. And that wears on you more than anything. But if I have one regret looking back, I'd probably be that. I was a workaholic.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it.
Look, you can't be an entrepreneur unless you're a workaholic. I mean, at this point, was your wife at all saying, Greg, maybe you should scale back on this? Or was she still, look, you got to do what you got to do?
She was still very supportive. I can tell what impacted her.
Yeah.
How could it not? But I think in her eyes, as long as it's still successful and he's healthy and it's one of those things, but it had its impact on our marriage. There's no doubt about it. And that's, again, when I say it was a relief, it allowed me to take a step back and reevaluate and really get my family life back. And ultimately, that is more important than anything.
It is. And yet it is not all of our life.
Yeah.
And it's hard, man. When I'm up here in my office working and it's now 7:00 and my fiance is downstairs and she's like, where's Dan? I want time with him. Yeah. When she really feels, man, that she's second banana to my business. And I don't like her feeling that way, but it's hard to separate myself. It's hard to get up from this chair when I'm doing something I love.
Right. It really
hard. As a badass entrepreneur, we have to surrender to the fact that we get everything that we want. It's great that you saw it as a bit of a relief, right? But there's loss, right?
Yeah, listen, to this day, there's a part of me that's always going to think, what if? But I don't regret any of it. I got to meet amazing people, travel the world. And I think more than anything, having that experience as a business owner that had to manage a team and deal with sponsors, it's helped me to better understand the role that I'm in today. So
Yeah. How did you decide what was next?
again, everything happens for a reason. At the time where, again, I knew I was shutting down the company, I was tying up loose ends, and one of my sponsors was a marketing agency here. So I had a meeting with them to go in and basically say, hey, thanks for all your support. That's a wrap. And at that time, I noticed there was a bunch of people in their lobby coming in and out. So I asked the owner, who's a good friend of mine, like, well, what's going on here? We're interviewing for our national sales director position. And he jokingly said, why, you want to throw your hat in the ring, right? So laugh it off. And I remember going home that night and it was on my mind what he said. And I told Christy, my wife, I was like, what would you think if I applied for this job? She's like, what can it hurt? Go ahead. Why not? You've always wanted to get into marketing. Maybe this is a sign. So I did. I applied and I think there was like 300 applicants. And wouldn't you know, I got the job. I ended up getting the gig and looking
Why
back.
do you think, but hold on, why do you think you got it and not the 299 other people?
Man, that's a great question. I think it was because of my experience of what I was coming off of. And I'm not going to lie. I think I knew a lot of people, a lot of influential people. I had a lot of contacts in the area.
Yeah.
And the agency was smart. They knew that. And
Yeah.
I'm guessing that's probably what gave me a leg up. But I certainly didn't have any marketing, not from a big agency experience.
Yeah, but building a business
Right.
like you did. And that's what an employer is looking for, not just what you know out of a book, but what have you done? And there's also a quality of you're confident.
And again, I'm sure it comes off when I talk, but that's just the way I am. The time I was 5 years old, my entire family owned their own business. We're successful, so I saw no other path.
And so the last thing I want to talk about is rejection. So how do you think doing all these things that you did and applying for this job where you could have been rejected, how do you think you overwhelm your own sense of fear around rejection?
Because I think ultimately I know if I fail at this, there's going to be another opportunity. And I know I'm going to succeed at some point. It just comes from experience. And there's no shortages of opportunities out there. You just, like you said, it's not going to fall in your lap. You have to create your own luck. And if you're not active, you never know where that next opportunity is going to come from. It could be the most random person that just happens to know so-and-so that you don't know. Everything happens for a reason. I'm going to keep saying that, but I'm a firm believer.
Yeah, it's funny because I go back and forth on that because there are times where I think, I don't know that there's a reason, but there is a lesson to be learned. And everything that you've talked about, Greg, has been a lesson that has built on itself. And so last thing, just share a little bit about the name of your company, what it is, what you do, what you love about it.
Yeah, the company I'm with currently, Your Business Marketer. We're a full service digital marketing agency based in Hudson, Ohio. And we're pretty unique in the sense where we really don't get into like web design and logos. We're much more on the deployment side of the campaign. And really, we specialize in programmatic targeting, which is essentially AI-based algorithm that we deploy that allow us to really hone in on a very specific audience. And again, as Dan, there's so much white noise and clutter out there today. It's not enough just to target the right people. You have to find ways to creatively stay in front of them and stay top of mind. Now there's technology out there that can allow you to do that effectively and efficiently. And that's what we do. And I'm very passionate about it, as you can tell. Of course, obviously, we love helping business owners and companies boost their sales and grow and expand. But again, selfishly, I love the strategy and the challenge that goes into it. And I think that's what drives me regardless of what I'm doing. If it's easy, I'm not going to be as passionate or as interested.
Yeah.
Each new client, each new project, each new campaign is a fresh start. And it's its own unique strategy. And I love it. I can't get enough of it.
And would you talk a little bit about the programmatic targeting? What are you doing differently?
With programmatic specifically, there's a few advantages that it gives you. If you're targeting people on Facebook, you're only targeting people on Facebook, and you're pretty limited as far as the type of targeting you can utilize, right? Where programmatic essentially allows you to retarget people regardless of the channel, platform, or device even that they're digesting their digital content. And again, because it's AI-based, it can identify not only where is that end user, are they on Facebook, YouTube, or are they on their phone, their smart TV, and adapt the type of ad that end user is going to see, but it can also adapt the messaging based on your online behavior, right? So things that you're searching for, websites or apps that you're visiting, it's constantly optimizing and looking at data points and essentially building a bucket full of qualified prospects. And it allows you to eliminate that shotgun approach, right? But reach your target audience anywhere that they live online. And that's the biggest advantage. In addition, you can track that customer journey and show what that ROI looks like and where it's coming from. So it's very data driven.
So thank you so much for your time, for sharing your story. Thanks for being a great example of entrepreneurship. One last thing, if people want to get in touch with you, how do we do that? Or get in touch with your company?
Yeah, just go to yourbusinessmarketer.com. My contact information is there. You can also schedule a one-on-one directly with me from our website. And I got to tell you, Dan, kudos to you. I had a blast doing this. I really enjoy your interview style. I've done a lot of these podcasts, and you're the first one that kind of has been able to pull everything together and bring value to your audience, I think. So I enjoyed it a lot. Great.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Yeah, it's fun to be good at something that you love.
There you go.
All right. Thanks again, Greg.
All right. Take care, Dan.
Hey, one last thing. If you're feeling stuck in business life, wherever, download my book, Jumping the Gap, Kill Your Story and Take Action. In this book, you'll see how the stories that you tell yourself are stopping yourself from living your greatest life. Just text the word GAP, G-A-P, to this number, 213-409-8366. 213-409-8366, and text the word GAP. It's a short read, it's fun, it's easy, and if you hate reading like I do, you can grab the audiobook. It's at that same link. Just text the word GAP, G-A-P, to 213-409-8366. You'll love it. All right, that's it. Go out there and be badass today.